basically what the message I've got is there's similar content to what, say, Jamie did with Wood and Grieve. There's a lot of common themes. I guess what I've got is just a sort of a different slant on how you look at it. And you know, this image here tells a story of how I see BIM linking to us. In 2006, it, you know, was didn't quite give us what we wanted. It was pretty hard to use in terms of MEP, not really all that polished. You didn't have some of the tools you got now, and I actually had a conversation just before, during lunch, about sloping and piping, connecting. But back then, you just didn't have those sort of things. I did a job a while back where it took me 6 weeks. One of the first jobs I did took me 6 weeks, and I'd probably do that in 1 week now. So, you know, the systems we had, not so much the MEP systems, but the systems we had to use it were really weren't all that good. The connectors, all of the kind of things that go into it weren't really all that effective. Ductwork manufacture to, you know, out of a sort of a Revit model, it was pretty much on a wish list, and it is still at the moment. I mean, you've got people that are putting a lot of effort into using models, Revit models, to sort of head in that direction. There's a hell of a lot of development to happen in that space, but going into 2010, if you sort of jump forward in time, the Mechanelect systems are starting to function for us now. The schedules, everyone's starting to use. You've seen it 2 or 3 times in the presentations, or probably more than that today, where people are really starting to leverage the data, and Paul's just before me is certainly right in that space. But now, you know, it's getting easier. I've had quite a few conversations over the last night and today where some people's glasses are half full, some people's glasses are half empty. I think the glass is half full, and it's going to fill up, and I think that tipping point's now, definitely in the near future, where the use that the information side of things is just going to explode. So from 14, the way I like to view it is that it is a fresh beginning now. We've gone through a lot of hard yards where we were ripping our hair out. The whole reason it's come about, the whole reason BIM has come about, is that we were battling in an industry that was using AutoCAD, using a lot of, how many people have been in an engineering workshop and sort of on a Friday night, you've got to get that package out, and then somebody this is from a design point of view, from a consultant, have said, have we coordinated? And everyone will sort of look up, and then all the heads would go back down like gophers, and hoping nobody, you know, sort of noticed them. And I mean, it's a bit of low-hanging fruit as far as BIM's concerned now, but one of the reasons I got into it, or got interested in the first place, is that coordination aspect. We're starting to look, and we've already seen in these presentations, that the calculation methods in ductwork are starting to happen. Photometrics into electrical lighting families, so that you're starting to get feedback. You know, design schedules with conditional formatting. So you might have design aids where you've got your electrical guys doing a lighting layout, and you'll have a lux level for that room. That conditional format will have, you know, an upper and a lower limit that you'll set in it, and it's not going to replace the engineer doing the actual their lighting design, but what it's going to do is it's going to be a design aid, so that process of putting the model together is going to happen faster. And you know, you could have a designer, whether they be an engineer or a design draftee, putting that in a model together, and an engineer might be overviewing it, and they don't have to have that sort of, you know, the Great Wall of China in between the two of them. You can have an engineer looking at that layout that will be, you know, colour-coded, so that you can see the schedule, sorry, relating to a particular area, will be colour-coded, so he can just look at that schedule and see what's happening in that design as it's going along. Where I see this going, especially in this, what I think as being a fresh beginning, is into smart cities. And there's been numerous cases where this has been alluded to, is that we're starting to use that information, we're starting to head, where can we take it and how can we leverage it? you know, for the design side of things, construction, operation, and through to the, you know, society side of things, where you're going to start linking a hell of a lot of this data. That's going to be over the next, you know, 5 to 10 years, probably closer to 10, getting past the operation. The reality, a lot of the conversations that I've had over today has been sort of getting that efficiency through design into construction. There's a lot of, obviously people have seen from the construction side coming into, you know, the operation of the facility, whatever it is, there's a big gap there, but I really believe that that's going to, you know, sort of happen. I don't think we're going back to drawing boards. So once you start getting building owners and operators getting interested in this side of thing, then there's another level above that, and that's starting to connect into smart cities to have all of that data starting to function at a high level. So, you know, there is a lot of work to go. We're nowhere near getting to that level, but we're starting to think about it. So, you know, that's where it's heading as far as I can see. On the design side, virtual testing and balancing multiple design options, the optioneering side of things is starting to really come into play with what we're doing now. We've seen already the duct sizing, the pressure drops, the analytical assistance, things like the mechanical engineers using, if you're using IS to do some of your engineering, you'll export the geometry out of, or bring it out of Revit, and those guys, they might have taken half a day to a day, or even in some cases bigger models, 2 days to sort of build up the geometry if they're using IES. You know, you're bringing that kind of data straight across now, and so those guys can go and do their thing. I mean, it's external to Revit at the moment, but in IES, but you know, there's efficiency gains there, and these are all sort of things we should be taking advantage of. And it's already been said, you've seen it several times with the less RFIs in a BIM workflow that's in operation. And I think from several of the presentations I've seen, one of the themes I've picked up is it's no good in isolation. You can't do this in isolation. You need to have the be on that team that's all on the same page. We've heard it a couple of times where you have that BIM execution plan and that meeting up front to get everyone on the same page so that this kind of thing can flow through. It's not going to happen when you're the only one doing it. Coordination, that's the, you know, that was what got me interested in the first place, and definitely it's a low piece of hanging fruit now. The construction side of it, to me, and we've seen the evidence of it, that if you've got that at that juncture between design and then going into the construction side of things, if you've got that clearer starting point, then that process, you don't tend to lose a lot of the work that you've done in that design process. Something that I've been saying consistently, even though I've been knocked back by numerous people in little conversations I've had, is that I believe the consultant and the not so much of the builder, the contractor side, the more the consultant going into the contractor side of things is, I believe there should be, early engagement. It's, you may not know the kind of, or depending on the kind of project it is, may have a big influence on whether you can have that early dialogue, but it's something that I really feel strongly about, is that if you have people that you're talking to or that you know you might be using, have that dialogue even before a project comes about, or it might not be, in particular, it might not be a project that you've actually got on, but have the relationship between the designers and the contractors, so that when the designer's starting to put their model together, they've got in mind what they think that particular job is going to have. It's no good to just work away in isolation and have the blinkers on and produce a model. And I've seen the direct result of this, where we've produced, as consultants, we've produced models, and it's been completely, the contractor will look at the actual model and go, great, nice concept, park it, and then they just start fresh. And you've probably picked that up in a couple of the presentations already. And it's pretty disappointing from a consultant's point of view, from that design side of things, to think that, okay, you've conveyed a concept, but that's no better than what happened when we had drawings, reams of drawings, or even PDFs that you hand to someone, and then they look at it, get the concept, and then they just start their own process fresh. So, and I think Jamie mentioned that earlier today. It's a hell of a lot more satisfying if you think that what you're doing is not just being discarded, or at least model-wise. Prefabrication and on time, site on time, that's something that I've got a slide later on that'll show you what we've done as consultants, and the lack of thought maybe we've had for what is going to happen on site. And if you've not got that communication process, then you're going to design this model that's not going to have in mind the actual workflow that the contractor is going to use to actually piece the job together. So again, there's that disconnect that, it limits the effectiveness of what you're doing. All of that prefabrication leads to less waste. We've seen in numerous points made already today that this is all leading towards to less wastage, greater coordination. Again, it's sort of the advantages there are obvious, and less RFIs. We've seen that in fairly in quite a bit of detail already. The data mining, Paul's sort of well and truly made that point that in sort of the operation side of things, that's really where we've got to head. Having that data and being a sort of an operator, they're going to start using all of that. And up until now, it's I don't know that a lot of it's sort of that to me definitely hasn't been something that has even really been possible. So I've got I've actually got a partner. My wife is involved in a company that's building buildings, and they've not even got this on the horizon yet. They're building. They've just finished one building. They're doing another one now. So it's definitely something that using this information is going to assist them. Maintenance operations, leveraging the actual data. I mean, imagining having a hospital, you've got a major infrastructure building, and you want that air handling unit to be serviced. Being able to leverage the data so that before you've even got the mechanic to come out and look at that AHU, they know where to go, they're not wasting time, all of that, and they know what model numbers it is. There's been a lot of discussion about being able to get that through and it being reality, but again, I think this is where we need to go. Planning facilities and inventory and stock, managing the actual, everything, all the consumables that go into a building, and this kind of thing they need to be able to have that. Now, I know there's a lot of discussion about the facilities management having the ability to do that out of something that's coming from a model that we create. But again, I think that's where we need to head. And obviously, if a building's going to change or be repurposed, having this kind of live model will make that a hell of a lot easier. I really do think that some owners, I suspect, probably can't even really account for what they have. They'll know what they've got, but can they really accurately account for everything? And hopefully, with this moving this direction, they might have that chance. With a system built from BIM, the audience, having that audience, in doing all of this, it's that audience that it's when you're looking at the next person you're going to hand that data to. If you're thinking about their needs, you can start to head in the right direction with this stuff. But too many times, I think we sort of silo what our particular need is, and we're not looking at what their needs are. So to me, that's where the audience comes in. And as I said before, with taking it to a higher level than not just constructing but actually taking it to the operator level and then starting to connect. Data mining will take on a completely, like a much greater purpose if you head toward the smarter city idea. I mean, even to the point of having emergency services tapping into the same kind of information. If, we've already seen that we can have live data that's being, the metrics coming out of the building coming into our systems, but take that to a higher level again. And you've got emergency services that might turn up and they've connected to that database. They know if there's any, hazardous materials that might be near a particular fire, but and having that kind of data. I mean, this is far-reaching stuff, but it's really, if you've got that goal in mind, it's going to pull you in a direction and make you think about how you're going to do things now that might influence what you're doing, and not just accept that you're just trying to produce something from a designer's point of view and then hand it to the contractor and pray that it's okay. If you've got those higher aims to aim at, it's going to pull you in potentially in different directions that might be more effective. New methods of acquiring data. The old classic sort of thought occurred to me as I was putting this together, and the old dial before you dig. I mean, moving in this direction, having that kind of access to that data and making it functional, it's going to make seeming like, dial before you dig seem like clay tablets. So at Jacobs, the evolution that we've been through, in 2000, Revit was pretty new, very new, to MEP at least. In 2007, it was a lonely one-way process. We were just handing models off, and they were one direction. And even when you're in that process, you weren't thinking a lot more about, other than what you're doing. You weren't thinking about what's the purpose that they're going to have at the other end. One of the classics I had only a couple of, actually it was 12 months ago, I was putting together our template. And I got at the system level, if you look at MEP, you've got, in Revit, you can override the colour and the line pattern and stuff at the system level. And it was at one point that it's like, yep, beauty, I'll do this in about half an hour. And I did, and we had it so that if we drew supply air, return air, whatever it is, you would have pipe work. If it was a single line, you'd have a particular line pattern and a colour, and it would all work beautifully. It was very quick to do. But then there was a job where we were internally working with our own architect, and they came over to me and said, I can't grey your stuff out. I just want to be able to see where the pipework is and the ductwork is, but it's all these bloody colours and, and I said, yep, beauty, that's what I want to see, but it wasn't what he wanted to see. He wanted it there, but he didn't want to be able to see it. So we had to strip out the system level override and then go to each view and then use filters. And it was, the template I've got set up is a multidisciplinary template with everything under the sun, and probably I'm starting to actually strip back a little bit on what I put in there. But every single view had to have that same controlling mechanism of giving each system its own representation, but it had to be done in every single view. But it was worth doing because you need to have the audience that you've got, that next person that's in that line of work, you've got to think about what they need, and is what you're giving them going to make their workflow efficient. So that was a little bit of an eye-opener for me, because I hadn't really sort of thought much further when I was starting the template. What do I need? And that's obvious. You think about that, and but until you've sort of been in that multi-disciplinary sort of environment, you don't. I didn't think about them that much. 2010, we're exchanging models, and it's starting to be a two-way process. And again, you're much more aware of the audience that you've got, and it could be internal or external, depending on who you're dealing with on the job. But it's a lot more social environment because you're starting to talk and have those considerations of what you're doing. Is that going to affect what they're doing, and is it what they need? I went to, over the last 18 months, I've talked to most of the big contractors. There's a lot of guys in the room here who probably remember the conversations I've had with them and badgering them to come out and visit. And it's really about as a designer, what do they want? What do they need? And is what I'm doing, is that okay? So it's a hell of a lot more social in that respect. The 4D, you've seen a lot of videos already, and it's all good stuff. It's 2011, a little bit, well, quite a bit before I got there, as we were starting to work in that space. You know, 5D, we're starting to look at it and incorporate that into our thinking. I haven't worked on any jobs where it's been a full-blooded process yet. And obviously, as the point I've already made is that looking down the track, I see all this not just stopping with the building owner. This to me is going to, you know, start connecting what we're doing into much larger key stakeholders right through into multiple buildings. And I think James sort of indicated before about having multiple buildings and being able to have a system that can be, and in a way, what I was thinking when I wrote this is in line with that. At least from my point of view, I was sitting in the crowd before thinking, yeah, that's where we've got to go. The workflows. The workflow for each project needs to reflect the BIM uses. All of those aspects that you're trying to portray in your design need to be in that workflow. The modelling at each stage needs to be outlined in definitions, basic do's and don'ts. There's a lot of, depending on what you've agreed in setting up the job, things like, you know, you may not model pipework under, you know, 50 mil, just as a, I think in time that'll become lesser and lesser, but even at the earlier stages when you're getting into it, you might choose that the hydraulic plumbing, if it's going to be done in flexible pipe, are you going to model that? And is there a way to maybe get the quantities in there through nested families or other techniques where you can get some quantities in there, but you're not going to waste mega amounts of time modelling things that are silly to even include in a clash detection. So it needs to be a bit of balancing there about how you're going to model, having the thought of, you know, what the purpose of that model is, and yeah, and basically having those setups. The BIM execution plan is a massive part of what I see as being the framework to set the stage, to set. You know, if you start in a project that's setting up, you've got a whole bunch of people. You have, you know, the mech, the elect, the hydraulic. You could have civil in there. You could have the structure, architecture, and they all sit in a room and say, right, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And by having that BIM execution plan, having the ground rules set, there's going to be a lot less confusion as you go through the job. The templates play a big part in that audience, and I've already gone through that example of the architect not being able to grey out their work. It's having that, and obviously with the BIM-POS template, that in conjunction with using your template is a good thing. We haven't used the BIM-POS template at Jacobs. I might be reconsidering that soon, but the thing is, that template is a critical part of being able to keep the environment that you're in on track. Sorry, that's next. So I might just head to you with the notes, because the BIM uses need to be just get to okay. The BIM uses, you need to be mindful of what it is that you require. You know, depending on the use of any particular aspect of the Revit model. If you don't know what the BIM use is and you haven't got it incorporated into your BIM execution plan, you can end up doing, you know, a lot of things like over-modelling or giving the client, giving the contractor, you know, information or work in the model that they're not going to use, or is it no benefit to them at all. You know, the BIM, the use adds efficiency to the project, and knowing those BIM uses is really, really key. Say, for example, the existing phase, a BIM use is laser scanning, which has been mentioned a few times, and I've got a little bit more info on that. But knowing what the use of the BIM scan is, I mean, there are numerous ways you can apply those laser scans. And if you're going to get a laser scan team to go and do that kind of work for you, you've got to want to know or have an idea of why you're doing it. And I'll go into that a little bit in a minute. Each project will tailor the BIM execution plan to what the need of that job is. So at Jacobs, what we've done is create a BIM execution plan that's got everything that you could possibly think of, and I'm sure over time that'll evolve in itself. But when you get the actual project and you see the conditions of what the project is, or what it entails, you can just cull all the different sections that may not relate to that particular project, and then come up with a very quickly, you know, we've got several jobs at the moment that are medium-sized projects that you can produce a BIM execution plan in a matter of 2-3 hours, and then take that to a startup meeting, put it on the table and say, okay, here's all of the different facets we need to consider. Here's the things that we don't want to consider, that kind of approach. LOD. I'm not sure if everyone in the room here grabs onto this as if their life depends on it. It's got its use, but I think a lot of people tend to hang their hat on it a little bit too much. Stop worrying about unnecessary data drops that you have to make, and map out what the data is actually required for, and how that audience, how the people that you're going to, for us, the contractors we're going to give it to, how are they going to use it? And it's probably similar to a message you might have already heard this today, but it's so true that if you're giving them information that's irrelevant to them, one, it costs you time and effort to do it, and then you're handing it to them and they don't need it. So look at what it is. So don't just accept, when you're looking at a project and you see, you know, LOD 400 is required and we're a consultant, you've got to, wait a minute, is that what we need to do? Is that what the contractor is going to use? Have a look at what people are asking for, because there's a lot of people, I've been to a lot of BIM meetings, startups, where a client might say they've seen something or read something on the internet and they've said, you know, seen LOD 500 and that's how our building's going to, you know, magically perform from day one. And then they'll come to this BIM startup meeting of the design getting up and running, and they'll, you know, they might be knocked back down to BIM LOD 300, and they're all floating this LOD term around, but very few people in the room might actually look at what's the purpose of actually considering this. So it's, you know, you should use the BIM execution plan to agree items before you overcommit to something that you might not have to do in the first place, you know, or the other way around. If you, the flip side of that is that you haven't considered something that might be important, and they might have randomly mentioned it, but you overlook it. So again, but that LOD is important from that point of view. Leveraging the information in the BIM model, work breakdown structures, we've already seen about parameters, the IFC debate, the Uniformat Omni-class. There's COBE, I didn't even put COBE in there, but a lot of this is, to me, in its infancy about how we're going to use it. So I think that's watch the space and keep your eye on it. Information specifics, you know, tagging and scheduling your design work, it comes back to that information side of things and leveraging that and not sort of manually doing things. The verification and simulation side of it is you have a look at, you know, what the LOD levels or what they have in this thing, and then you start to get an idea of what the reality of what you've got to do is, then start looking at that information specifics and see if what you're doing needs to be verified and you know, check before you actually hand it over, simulate it. I had a job going back many years ago where we had a chiller, and it was a replacement into a basement of a building, and the manufacturer had, you know, everyone had checked for the actual chiller to fit where it was meant to go, and that was all fine. It was, pipework was all sorted out. They got it to site and realised that they had to dismantle all of there was a little bit of pre-assembled pipework on the chiller, and that all had to be ripped off while the chiller was sitting in front of the door. So, you know, that verification and simulation really is something where you can start to use the information and the geometry from the architect's model. You're looking at chiller sitting there and start to do clash detection against in that path of that chiller going into the plant room. I mean, it would be a much better scenario to have all that pipework that was on the chiller removed in a, you know, sterile environment in the workshop where, one, safer, you're not trying to, and this was big pipework that was not easy to sort of unbolt and then just drop down onto the ground. So, you know, major advantages in actually doing that kind of verification and simulation work pre the actual work. Laser scanning, in terms of the actual laser scanning, too far. You know, gathering the data. We've got a workflow that we've had a job recently where we've been using a lot of scanning, and we need to have a workflow, and we've got a workflow up here. But you know, who's the audience, and what's the purpose of gathering the data? You know, the client to me is, in this particular case I'm looking at, the client saw this scan, and it changed the actual, the whole scope of the project. They took one look at this, and this is up in top of a retail space. They saw all the wiring, just saw, and this is nowhere near as bad as some of the spots. They saw this, and it really did change their mind on what the scope of the job was. You know, to replace all that wiring and to sort of, you know, redo it all and position it all on cable trays and whatever technique they were going to do, it just blew their budget and what they had in their mind for what the budget of the job was going to be out of the water. So, and this trivia, I'll show another slide here. You know, this is a trivia. It's the same data from the scan. It's just another way of looking at it. This is a HTM. Click on this. It's a web-based software, and you can see in the plan view here, down in the bottom left, that all the scans points that we did, and then you can see the you know, the panoramic view of the data. You know, it's a very powerful tool. You find, just going back to that, that sometimes when you do scanning, and you might do a scan of a space underneath the ceiling, you want to see everything on that ceiling so you know accurately what's there. And depending on the scan, this is, again, you need to know the audience of what's the purpose of this, the use of this data. And in this case, it was for the design team to be able to know what they're dealing with. You can have engineers go to site and do site inspections, which they have to do anyway. But having that scan and being able to revisit those areas is invaluable. But on top of that, if the scan guys were just a little bit too far apart in their scans, and you get a little bit of blurring in between the points. It's very defined near the scan point of the scanner, but if the scan's too far away, and looking at this, the bottom left, you can see in the top of that image, there's a lot of difference between, or a lot of distance between that top row of scans and the next row of scans down. So in the middle of those two, might get a little bit fuzzy with the resolution of what you're looking at. So having the true view, which is the same data but a different way of looking at it, you can pick up, using both sort of aspects, you can really start to see what it is you need to see. Obviously, as you learn and go through the process of designating where the scans need to be, you can eliminate issues like that. A second audience in gathering that data is the design team. This image, it's got everything in it: air handling unit, fire, you got lighting, and it's just a really good way of utilising that technology to give you the information you need that you can actually have a lot of different uses for that kind of approach. This design, here's a case of having the design model and the as-built model. Now, here it's just a fairly simple lighting layout in a back of house, but you've got a way of, you've got several uses of, or several scenarios that you can have. You can have in that process, you can have a, just going back there, you can have the design laid out, and then you can scan once the work has been done, and do a comparison of the two. It's probably a handy way to see if the design changed. Looking at the building further down the track, you can also see if something has changed. So you might have done the job 2 years ago, and if you've got that kind of data, and then you come back and the client wants a different purpose for that area, you can reuse that data to see if things have radically changed since you've been there. In this, the audience again could be the design team, where, or actually you can see here that blend of having the scan and the actual digital model, and it's just another aspect of looking at the same thing. In-ground services, I wasn't involved in this, but it was something I saw not that long ago, where there was a project where they had a massive amount of in-slab conduiting and pipework to do, and to be able to bring, once you've poured slabs, it's a little bit hard to sort of know exactly where things have been or where they run from point A to point B. If you scan something like an installation that's got a significant amount of in-ground services, you can incorporate that into your models even after the slab is poured. You know exactly where things are, and that could have implications for sort of loading up of equipment on the floor if the use was to change later on. Just having that data is a major plus I see as a little bit of insurance about knowing what's happening under the ground as well as over the ground. Post-construction scans to verify the work that's actually been done. I think that's a very powerful tool. If the scale and the scale of economy on the actual project allows it, it's a very good way of checking what's been done versus what you actually designed. Other sectors have been using this technology for a while. I think there's been a few points made already that we've sort of, as an industry, we're, I wouldn't say playing catch up, but it's they've been doing this sort of thing for quite a while, and obviously being at Jacobs, we've got a lot of power, and they've been using this technology for a number of years very effectively, where they'll have a scan. And we can do the same thing. We can scan something, and then you might have a chiller or an air handling unit, whatever it is, a major pump set that you need to get into a certain spot, and you think to yourself, well, I'll just send the engineer out there and see if he can, he'll assess it as to whether that you think you're going to get that in. But if you do a scan of that particular facility, you can then do a clash detection of the piece of equipment, and the piece of equipment could be something as simple as a box. You don't have to have, it'd be nice to have the Grundfos pump all for you at the time, but if you have just a simple box that's representing the extremities you think that model's going to be, then you have that laser scan. You can do a clash detection or of the egress path to see if that equipment's going to get in there. So again, having an idea of, what is the audience, what's the target, what's the purpose behind doing that laser scan is all comes into the mix. And it's not just the construction or building up the design and then going into the construction side of things. There are many applications where you could use this kind of thing to really, to your advantage. The metrics will change for each audience at different stages of the job. It's something that in pre-design, schematic design, concept design, you're going to have different BIM uses in those stages. So you need to be mindful again of what it is you're doing at each stage. It really does come back to communication. And I mean, I see this as being a Ferrari, but at the end of the day, if you can't communicate with the people you're trying to give the information to, that Ferrari is going to be, that really fancy machine is going to be useless, because you're going to be producing the wrong kind of information, or over information, or at the wrong stages of the job. And we, in a big way, we use the BIM execution plan, and we've got as many BIM uses as we can think of mapped out, so that when you see what they are in that project, you can start to apply those and cull the rest. Gathering, we've already looked at the scanning, the analysing side of things, coordinating with other disciplines, forecasting the use of the operation. Communication, I just mentioned, the visualising, transforming data for the intended use. We had an example just very recently where we've had a client who's manually imported positions of some structural elements into databases, and they haven't had any of this BIM workflow, and they're asking for it now in a big way. But an advantage they didn't foresee coming was that they had to position thousands of structural elements into the northing and eastings. We took and we looked at it, was just out of a conversation and when we were talking with them, and then it dawned on us, wait a minute, we've got all that data already, and we handed them that data, exported out the northing and eastings of that data, and that saved them having to go and they used to, every time they had a project, they would go and set up a team to sort of follow the project and do this sort of data entry, which was a major effort for them because there's a hell of a lot of structural elements in their job. And we gave it to them, and they just said, there you go. It's part of the information coming out of the model, and they've just gone, whoa, we don't need to go and employ 3 data entry people for 6 months to do that process. Realising the fabrication, assembly and control, it's something that we've been talking about that already, but it's something that I think as we get further down the track and start to get information flowing through from the designer to the contractor and into the builder, this realisation is going to happen. Modularisation has been already up on the screen today. Looking at, from our point of view, from what we've had in the past, what was given in this particular case was not exactly what was expected, what was going to be a result. I mean, admittedly, our project wasn't, our deliverable out of the design model was never intended to be for workshop manufacture. But if you've got in your head what it is the audience, and in this case it's the contractor, if you know how they're going to be doing it and what techniques they're going to be using, then I'm pretty sure, having quite a few conversations with the guys that I've been working with, that our model would have been significantly different. If we haven't considered, and we've got no consideration for the modularisation of that project, then it's no wonder that the contractor is going to pick up our work, put it aside, and then start their own process. And that all leads to efficiency, and safety on site. Obviously, the less time you're on site, the safer it's going to be, the less costs. We've already seen that today. Type programs, again, it's a major plus having this kind of process, and I keep coming back to the audience. If we don't have that as a designer in mind, then we're just it's really disappointing when you in the past when you see that the work you've done stops, and then the contractor's got a really tight deadline and they've got a totally different process to what we've been considering. In the travels, when I had that I've done talking to a lot of contractors, one of the key elements that came up, absolutely universal and very consistent, and actually quite loudly, was the accuracy of what we do. And it's already been alluded to today that, and I think maybe with the BIM-CLASH use of the fittings will go a long way towards making that buildability a lot more. It's going to make the project that you're handing over, it's going to give the contractor a lot more confidence that they don't have to rebuild what you've done. So looking at a fresh look at the BIM-CLASH detection, element priorities, you can look at all the different disciplines, but things that are critical to construction and can't move obviously take a priority. Movable but with a high degree of difficulty would be second cab off the rank. Easily moved, it's a less of a worry and probably less costly. And then moving without having to verify any other issues is something that is going to be down the track in terms of importance. And again, we've used Navisworks. We haven't used Celebri. Actually, I was just having a few conversations about that. But at the end of the day, it's whatever software it is, the process really is what we're trying to get at. Mapping the BIM facility to management systems, we've seen quite a bit of that already. Reduced, from my point of view, the reduced data loss at handover at each stage of the project is a big key, so that you can start to get it. Paul was talking just before me about being able to manipulate that so that you're going to have more efficiency. Having the old days of cutting down 10 trees and handing over all the drawings and then another 10 trees to produce reams and reams of manuals is something that should be a thing of the past. As to what the facilities management need and how they're going to use it, there's been numerous discussions last night and today about that. I suppose that's really a case of keeping an eye on how that's going to develop, but definitely I think the days of handing over all those massive amounts of hard copies and stuff are going to be over. And making sure that the data can be transferable. There's no point having a ton of data that's not used, that's not needed, and having it in a system that can come across is critical. No more wasted loss of data at interface. It'd be nice. Over from the design to the construction phase in 2FM. As built or record modelling is something that I think needs to happen as we move forward to make this process efficient. The life cycle management side of things is something that starts to come. It's probably sort of it's not going to be here now. We know that we've already seen that, but it is something that's coming up on the horizon. It's we're looking into the implications of BIM. What it might have in the longer term. BIM's, it's not BIM's place. I don't think it's not our place to be the leader of all the systems, but more likely it's sort of the missing piece between the facilities and the management puzzle. I think I think they've got their own systems that they've got for facilities management and moving into life cycle. But with the BIM information that we're able to start to manipulate, I think it can help go towards tying what they do together. Once the BIM has been, once we've been working with this type of data, I mean, data mining can start to come into being an effective way for services to become the next step. Some of the skills that we need to address with relation to BIM feeding into the world have been discussed, and I don't think they're going to be solved in the next 6 months, but it is something that really we are focusing on fairly heavily. Time. So look at why, not just what you're doing in BIM, but study the audiences you have and the projects. I think they'll experience a fresh beginning. It's to me the glass is half full and very rapidly moving in the direction we are. Thank you.